Craig! Maggie cried, her hands cupped around her mouth as she yelled into the open door of the Pinafore's deck. Craig! There were no more gifts lying in wait for us aboard the ship, and no sign of our friend on the deck. At one point, I nearly told Maggie that he was probably in the hold, where it'd be safe and warm. But the words died in my throat. I couldn't keep clinging to such a hopeless idea. Come on, I said weakly. Let's head down. The hold was unchanged since we were last aboard. The pile of corpses intertwined in a desperate orgy of violence still stood over everything else in the room. Something about the eyeless faces burned its way into my skull, and once again I wondered exactly how they'd suffered such a horrible fate. Maggie and I were silent in our search for Craig. I couldn't bring myself to cry out for him, and neither could Maggie. It felt useless, and some small part of me kept telling myself to stay small and quiet, hidden from view. Don't call attention to yourself, it said. Don't cry out. We checked each one of the ship's rooms, every quarter, every hold, every cupboard and closet, until at last we both converged on the captain's quarters, and our breath caught in our chests as we noticed the door wide open. Craig's clothes were in a pile a few meters past the threshold. Craig! Maggie cried, rushing forward. I nearly joined her, but at the last second some flicker of emotion stopped me. Before I could warn her, Maggie was on the other side, reaching down. The door slammed shut, and by the time I reached the door, a distance that was barely 2 meters, she was screaming in unspeakable pain. It was a gibbering howl of terror and agony that filled me with such horror I could feel the corners of my vision blur and turn black. My muscles became weak, and my stomach damn near fell out my ass. As it was, I could feel a warm stream of urine trickle down my thigh and calf. I wanted to push on. I wanted to slam into the door with all my rage and strength and rescue my friends, but my legs betrayed me. They screeched to a halt, and before I even realized what I was doing, I had turned on my heels and I was fleeing the other way. The strangest plan formed in my head. I can't say how or why it came to me, except that in the end of it, it was probably the only thing that saved me. The pile of corpses, as horrifying as it was large enough to allow entry in some places. One place in particular came to mind. A small nook, barely large enough for a person, but I went for it, sprinting into the room, crawling my stomach backwards so as to slide underneath the mountain of rotten bodies. The feel of ice-cold fingers sliding along my trouser leg, hooking on pockets and poking my chest and back was enough to make me nearly cry out. And when one of those fingers broke off and lay resting on the back of my neck, turning moist and clammy from the warmth, I had to fight to keep myself from vomiting. I managed to wrench a few arms free of their place and covered myself as best I could, and then I lay there, suddenly aware of the terrible, deafening silence of the ship. The weight of my decision to flee settled in during the long seconds, and I was forced to reflect on the piss I was still soaking into my underwear. I could have been there for hours, or maybe just minutes. In the scheme of things, it was but a moment, although it didn't feel like it. Eventually something sounded out of the corridor, and I heard the terrible squeal of a door swing open. Awful voices spoke in ancient Germanic from Old English, turning my stomach with a sound of phlegm and inhuman cadence. Whatever I saw move past was not human. I can say that for sure. But neither was it in my field of view for long enough for me to say what it was. I think there may have been two. I'm not sure. I may have blacked out because the next thing I remember was Maggie's face glaring at me with terror. She was gagged with straw, just like Sebastian had been, and her eyes had been brutally carved out. Except, unlike Sebastian, she was sweating and shivering, occasionally letting out a trembling cry of confused pain. I know it's impossible, but I swear she was looking at me. I swear she knew I was there. She started to thrash, and it amused her captors. One of them approached her seizing body and, still laughing, bent down to stick a small red bow to her forehead. It muttered something to its friend, and together they hauled her towards the ladder. I couldn't see what happened next, but I never saw her again. There was no sign of her on the ship or anywhere else. There was some rope lying on the deck, and I imagined she was bound and hauled up to be taken back to the workshop. I was there for 2 days, and eventually hypothermia got the better of me. By the time the second expedition arrived and pulled me out, screaming in terror when I'd first cried out at the sound of their voices, the bodies around me had started to freeze to my skin. It tore away like duct tape, leaving long stretches of black, necrotic flesh lying beneath. 2 fingers on my left hand were gone, 2 on my right. I still have respiratory problems, and my remaining fingers have lost all but the most basic coordination, which at the very least has put an end to my smoking habit. My story wasn't exactly met with the warmest reception. The official story is that Sebastian became lost hiking to the second signal, which was deemed to be nothing more than a fluke according to scans. Without a guide, the rest of us succumbed to hypothermia and suffered severe delusions. Blood-soaked snow along the base of the pinafore raised some suspicion, all of which was aimed at me, and in the end I had to leave my post at the university after rumors that I'd killed Craig and Maggie in a deranged moment, of cabin fever refused to die down. I don't think it helped that when I'd first awoken and pulled my face free of the frozen wood beneath me, I'd left a chunk of my right cheek behind. I still look ghoulish, scaring even myself when I look into the mirror. I don't celebrate Christmas anymore, that's for sure. Not that it matters to some people. As we approach yet another jolly season, I'm forced to revisit this terrible adventure again and again. And now, as if to make it worse, someone has been having fun at my expense. I received a gift. A plain, wrapped box with a familiar twine wrapped around it in a neat bow. It was small, far smaller than the one that contained Sebastian's head, and when I opened it to reveal one of my missing fingers, quite likely left behind when they tore me out of my frozen tomb. I thought it would stay there, a little piece of me locked forever in that nightmare, frozen stiff to the side of some medieval sailor. There was even a little tag. Io winstre des genuine. The words sent shivers down my spine. You left this, old friend, it read. Thank you for listening. That's the end of this one.